So the Dave Chappelle transes controversy doesn't appear to be ending anytime soon, even though his comedy special is out. What's said appears to be what is said, and people ought to move on. But in this recent iteration of this non-controversy that the far left is trying to make a controversy, Patton Oswalt is at the center of it because Patton Oswalt had the audacity, the absolute crazy, insensitive ability to share an Instagram post about somebody he's known for over 30 years, close to 40 years, who invited him out to do an opening set for one of his little comedy specials. Now, we're going to get into all this. We're going to talk about how virtually nothing can satisfy these transit activists, but I need you to shield yourself not only from this cringe, but from internet problems with Virtual Shield Transition, sponsored transition. Yes, it's a sponsored transition. A newly discovered security flaw seems to be one of the worst ones in the last decade. This security flaw will allow hackers, spies, criminals access to your private personal data as long as you have an internet connected device. But luckily for you, your privacy is and always has been in your own hands, and that's why I recommend Virtual Shield, because Virtual Shield is a no-log VPN, meaning they never store your search history, which for a lot of you, trust me, we never want to see your search history. Now, this month, I partnered with the creators of Virtual Shield to give you guys a 50% off discount for your lifetime subscription if you just go to virtualshield.com/justice. Again, 50% off, no log VPN. It's also got that bunch of features, like if you want to do that out of country streaming, whatever, just go to virtualshield.com/justice. So on January 1st of this year, not to be confused with January 6th, the darkest day in our republic, where were you January 6th when our democracy completely collapsed in on itself? I was at a car dealership trying to buy a car, and somebody was trying to tell me that frame damage is nothing serious when you're trying to buy a car. That's where I was when the republic fell. Where were you? Let me know in the comments below. But January 1st, Patton Oswalt decided to post this Instagram post of him and the person who is the most transphobe in the history of transphobia, Dave Chappelle, and it appeared that they were enjoying a warm embrace. It was beautiful in a little bit of a ways, and I don't want to get into my feelings based on it because this might be a little bit weirder of a video than you guys expected, and no, that's not serious for the commenters who don't get sarcasm in the comments of my videos, which is way too many of you. And it was kind of nice. I'm gonna read you the caption so you can see how kind of nice this post actually kind of was. Finished a set at Mecca and got a text from Dave Chappelle. Come over to the arena he's performing in next door and do a guest set. Why not? I wave goodbye to this hell year with the genius I started comedy with 34 years ago. He works an arena like he's talking to one person and charming their skin off. Anyway, I ended the year with a real friend and a deep laugh. Can't ask for much more. Now, as you can see from this Instagram post, yes, it's weird to talk about old people posting on Instagram and not girls just posting photos of her butt for 8 million people to like and make comments about how her personality is so stellar, even though it's a photo of her butt. It's nice. It's Patton Oswalt saying, hey, look, I was doing a set. Dave Chappelle was next door. Dave Chappelle's been a friend of mine for 34 years. We actually started comedying together, and he invited me over in order to do an opening for him, and I really got to watch him up close and personal, as I've done for over 30 years, and he really still, even in a giant arena, speaks in a way that he's connecting with everybody as an individual. Now, most of you with logical functions of your brain that are actually working in working order, they're not out of service, look at this and say, this is pretty wholesome. It's kind of nice. I didn't know Patton Oswalt had this connection with Dave Chappelle, and it was nice of Dave to think of Patton because he knew he was in the area and invite him over to do an opening, and it was nice of Patton Oswalt, who said he had a horrible year, to close it out in a nice way. But what you don't realize is that people, and by people I mean transes activists, and those are both transes that are activists and activists who aren't transes that are being activists on behalf of imaginary imaginary transes that they're speaking for don't like Dave Chappelle still. They're still angry. So Patton Oswalt got a ton of backlash to this innocuous post about how Dave Chappelle is this evil transphobic that is a transphobic, and he's both evil and transphobic. This is the reaction that he got, and Patton Oswalt should have responded to this reaction with no response. He should have just ignored it, because the people who are angry at Dave Chappelle are people like those featured on the Young Turks that say ridiculous things like this.
You to Dave Chappelle for all of this nonsense. It's I love when comedians do that thing where they're like, people get canceled. I really shouldn't say this. I'm filming my Netflix special, but here's some bigotry. Like, it's just it's to drive engagement. It's to create a controversy. You want to be canceled because that's going to drive views, because canceling doesn't really work. It's not a real thing. Like, if now that he's got all this controversy around him, his special's getting more views. I also want to say it's extremely sexist to reduce the value of women to their reproductive abilities. Lots of cis women cannot give birth. Are they less of a woman because they can't give birth? Dave Chappelle, Dave Chappelle, Dave Chappelle, Dave Chappelle, Dave Chappelle, Dave Chappelle, Dave Chappelle.
Always a favorite go-to clip of mine for people who react to Dave Chappelle in a negative way, because that Ravana girl knows nothing about the special, and none of the people on the Young Turks panel admittedly watched the special, much like all the people who are criticizing Dave Chappelle didn't watch the whole special, because in there she talks about how Dave Chappelle allegedly made the statement or claim or whatever that women aren't women unless they give birth to children, and that caused her to retort by saying, "Oh, Dave Chappelle,
Dave Chappelle, Dave Chappelle, Dave Chappelle, Dave Chappelle, Dave Chappelle, Dave Chappelle.
Do you think women who can't give birth are not women?" Which is not what Dave Chappelle said at all. They played the clip and she just totally misinterpreted it because she doesn't know anything about what happened in the special, because she can't be bothered as a person on an alleged news network to look into the facts. Dave Chappelle just said people are all born from women. That's it. He didn't say anything about women who don't give birth. If you think that he holds that position, you are absurd.
Dave Chappelle, Dave Chappelle, Dave Chappelle, Dave Chappelle, Dave Chappelle, Dave Chappelle.
I really need to emphasize this for those of you out there in my audience. I know a lot of you already know this because you've watched my other videos on Dave Chappelle, but there's some new people, there's some unfamiliars, there's some strangers out in the audience that don't know that Dave Chappelle is nobody's right winger. He is very far left, specifically on race issues. If you watch this special and you come away with Dave Chappelle is an evil right winger, Donald Trump supporter, hater of the transes, then you are ridiculous and you went in there with those preconceived notions. But more likely, you didn't watch the special, you're not into this type of comedy, and you just made judgments based on what the Twitter people said about this special. Because even in this special specifically, Dave Chappelle made it about his trans friend who was bullied by the same left-wing activists that are attacking Patton Oswalt, to the point where his friend jumped off a building to her death. That is the level of actually not caring about the transes that these activists have, because they're just trying to bully Dave Chappelle into complying with their overall narrative. They don't want to be talked about. They think that they're above comedy, they're above jokes, and they're trying to control his speech. That's what this is about.
To the transgender community, I am more than willing to give you an audience, but you will not summon me. I am not bending to anybody's demands. And if you want to meet with me, I'd be more than willing to, but I have some conditions. First of all, you cannot come if you have not watched my special from beginning to end. You must come to a place of my choosing and a time of my choosing. And thirdly, you must admit that Hannah Gadsby is not funny.
That's what this always has been about. It has nothing to do with anything right-wing related. These are left-wingers fighting left-wingers, but Patton Oswalt can't handle criticism in the way of Dave Chappelle, so he followed up this with another Instagram post where he totally throws him under the bus. So before I get into the post that Patton Oswalt put out, his apology, his meek surrender to these radical transes activists, we just have to talk about the image that he chose, because I'm always fascinated as somebody who is new to Instagram, Instagram.com/actualjustice, like how I work that plugin. I do, definitely, go check it out. Go follow me, trying to get to 10,000 followers. It's not going well. Is this image of him sadly in front of the mirror, pontificating or wondering about the criticism that he received, is absurd in every possible way. And I'm always fascinated by the way that people post on Instagram like this, because who took this photo? You know that there had to be somebody in the background that Patton Oswalt said, listen, I'm gonna go like this, I'm gonna look down, I'm gonna look very sad and very in my words, I'm gonna have a notebook, so it's like I'm writing stuff down, maybe I'm writing down my thoughts because, you know, I'm a very thoughtful guy and I need to write down all my thoughts because they can't be contained. But you need to take this photo in such a way, because we're in front of a mirror, that you can't actually be in the mirror, so that way you're not in the photo. It's all about me literally reflecting. That's why I have a mirror and I'm taking a photo in front of and with my reflection. That's the thought process in my brain that I've imagined, the backstory, the canonized knowledge and lore behind this photo, and I think it's ridiculous that all this went into it. Just put a post of text and say, read more down below. You don't have to do this dramatic thing. You're not a 15-year-old girl. Stop being a 15-year-old girl. Maybe if you want to be a 15-year-old girl, do the thing that I was talking about earlier that girls do, where they take photos of themselves trying to look all glam, but then they write this deep post as if they're not trying to show off how they look and make everybody feel brighter about them. They're trying to actually do something deep. Those are my favorite posts on Instagram, by the way, where girls are taking obviously overtly sexy photos, but they caption them something vaguely deep, even though it's like pop philosophy or anything that they found on the internet, like a quote that doesn't really mean anything, but it sounds meaningful if you're really dumb. And if you're drooling over the girl, maybe you'll be like, oh wow, she's so deep. She Googled some stupid ass quote and that lured me in. But yeah, Patton Oswalt in front of the mirror, thinking deeply, reflecting on his past sins, absolutely absurd in every way. And I think this whole portion of the video is probably the most important portion of the video, because I just broke down, narratively speaking, how Patton Oswalt constructed this scene, and it's you just enriched for me doing that. But of course, the text really sells how weak Patton Oswalt is. I saw a friend I hadn't seen in a long time this New Year's Eve. We've known each other since we were teens. He's a fellow comedian, the funniest person I ever met. I wanted to post a pic and IG story about it, so I did. The friend is Dave Chappelle. 34 years we've been friends. He's refocused and refined ideas a lot of us look at as settled about race and history and life on planet Earth, and spun them around with a phrase and a punchline. We've done bad and good gigs. Open mics, by the way, Mike should be M-I-C, not Mike the person. Patton Oswalt, you need to correct this, otherwise I'm gonna get angry at you. And TV tapings. But we also 100% disagree about transgender rights and representation. I support trans people's rights, anyone's rights, to live safely in the world as their fullest selves. For all these things he's helped me evolve on, I'll always disagree with where he stands now on transgender issues. But I also don't believe a seeker like him is done evolving, learning. To know someone that long, see the struggles and changes, it's impossible to cut them off. Impossible not to be hopeful and open and cheer them on. Also, I've been carrying a lot of guilt about friends I've cut off. Now look, there's more. It's all very dramatic. Again, you have Patton Oswalt looking into the mirror, reflecting upon himself and reflecting on his previous Instagram posts. It's very tragic, very stunning, and very brave. But the key portion in there that really bothered me and should bother Dave Chappelle is Patton Oswalt talking about how we 100% disagree on trans' rights, and then saying that he is in favor of transes and anyone living without fear of violence or death or whatever he said. I read the quote. I'm paraphrasing now, but you understand what I'm saying. And the reason this is so nasty, the reason this is so ridiculous is twofold. One, you're never going to satisfy the transes activists. Go look at the comments of this. There are people who support Dave Chappelle who are mad at Patton Oswalt for being soft about this, but there are a ton of transes activists who are saying this isn't good enough. Patton Oswalt literally has to fight Dave Chappelle to the death in these people's minds in order to prove that he's not a transes phobe. But on top of that, Dave Chappelle does not believe that transes don't have a right to live safely and don't have a right to not be victimized by violence. That's absolutely ridiculous. And the only people who could have that takeaway from Dave Chappelle's special, as I said in the beginning, are people who don't watch Dave Chappelle's special, or people who think that transes are so inherently weak and inferior to the general population that even slight comedic bits that aren't even really at their expense are the things that are going to push them over the edge, and thus they're going to be discontinued from the world that we live in. And again, I talked about this multiple different times, and I highly recommend that people watch Dave Chappelle's special, especially people who are unfamiliar about the story of his friend Daphne, because the special works as a love letter to his friend who ended up killing herself, not because she was a transes and transes jokes were being levied at her by Dave Chappelle, but because of the mob that was angry at her for not siding with them against Dave Chappelle, because this person also identified as a comedian. There's an absolutely beautiful part of the end of the special where Dave says, my problem with the transes is you don't treat members of your alleged community very well. And he considers Daphne a comedian, part of his tribe, and that's what he's doing. He's sticking up for Daphne. And there's a whole thing about how we don't have to necessarily agree on 100% of things, but you have to accept that everybody is having a human experience to a certain extent, and that's what Dave Chappelle says that he accepts. So yeah, there's points where he says women are women and that he's Team TERF and all these other comedic bits throughout his special, but the overall conclusion is that he deeply cared about this transes person because this person was a comedian, because he connected with this person, and there's no hate at all or phobia, which is a rational fear, against the transes as a whole. It's all about them coming at him based on them not watching a special or deliberately misinterpreting his special for political and personal gain. Like, there's a lot of people who are fame seekers that are trying to latch onto Dave Chappelle's name in order to bring themselves up if they can take him down with these terrible, cringy articles on sites like BuzzFeed. Now, look, my opinion on this is not very unique. Obviously, people have put out their takes about this since the moment that it happened, but I think Joe Rogan's take, as somebody who knows both of these people personally and as somebody who is disappointed in Patton Oswalt whining and basically submitting to the mob, really holds true when you take a look at it. So I'm going to play a little bit of that, and Joe Rogan clips, you better not copyright me.
The Patton Oswalt thing that happened yesterday?
No, I love Patton Oswalt.
I love Patton too.
Oh, what happened?
He's like, Patton's a very kind, very sensitive guy. And Patton apparently was in town with Dave. And Dave texted him, like, hey, do you want to come do a set at my show? And Patton went to Dave's show. Dave was doing an arena, and Patton was doing another show in town. So Patton came to Dave's show, and they had a good time together. And Patton took a couple of pictures with him and Dave and put it up on Instagram. And then apparently a bunch of people were saying, you know, how could you hang out with that transphobe, that this and that, blah, blah, blah. And so the next post, he makes this long apology. He writes like a fucking essay on how he feels about trans people.
Oh, there he is.
And, you know, the real fuck up.
But
I mean,
what?
listen, again, I love Patton. I love him to death. He's a really, really sweet guy, which is why he did this in the first place. But one of the things that he said is he disagrees, 100% disagree about transgender rights and representation with Dave. That's not true. I think he said that to placate the mob. But Dave does not have any problem whatsoever with transgender rights and representation. It's not right. He's just saying that because they were attacking him, saying that Dave is transphobic. He's not.
Right.
He's not. I mean, I know him very well. He's a fucking fantastic person. He's not. That's not him. He's just making jokes about stuff.
So overall, the YouTube engagement coach or whatever position I made up for that says that I need comments and reaction to my video. So let me know what you guys think about Patton Oswalt. Is he just weak, or is he also a horrible friend? Is he a coward? Let me know all your takes. Maybe you agree with Patton Oswalt that it's okay to throw your friend of 34 years under the bus and say that they're not in favor of transes being able to be safe throughout our society because they're a transphobe, because people on the internet told you they were a transphobe. Again, comments down below. If you like the video, you can show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. You can follow me on all my social medias. You can support me via the support links in the description box of this video. This has been me talking about Patton Oswalt and the Dave Chappelle thing. Till next time, mirror reflection.